Hey, it's Bob. In this episode, I am joined by Daan van Rossum, who is the CEO and co-founder of FlexOS, host of the Lead with AI podcast, a writer, speaker, AI expert, and a LinkedIn top voice for 2024. Daan and I have an insightful discussion on the future of work and the role of AI in shaping it. We explore the challenges and opportunities of AI adoption in the workplace, the importance of employee autonomy, and the need for responsible AI integration. Daan is upskilling people on a regular basis with his Lead with AI coaching program, so stick around for his words of wisdom to elevate your AIQ and that of your team. Hope you enjoy the discussion, and thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. With me today is Daan van Rossum. He is the CEO and co-founder of FlexOS. Daan, I will let you give a proper introduction to what it is you do and what FlexOS is all about. And we'll get into it because I have many questions.
Okay, cool. Yes, happy to do that. Bob, thanks so much for having me on. So I am Daan. That part you got correct. And I do have a company called FlexOS. So far, so good. Without making it too long of a story, dating 40 years back, I've been working for quite a while. I think this is like year 25 in the workforce. And I've had really good work experiences and I've had not so good work experiences, but I saw the potential of having, a place that you love working and that you love coming to and with good colleagues and doing interesting work and meaningful work. And then I heard from a lot of people that they don't have that. And so the mission of the company was born, long before the company was born, which is to create a happier future of work and to really look at like, how can we give people the opportunity to have a great work life? In terms of like the kind of work that they do, where they work, when they work, how they work. And obviously the pandemic has been an accelerant for some of that, like especially in the where we work, that has changed a lot in the last couple of years, although some companies are eager to go back to prehistoric times or pre-pandemic times. But some things have changed for the better. And some things I think we're still really early on, especially obviously in AI, which is our mutual topic. And so the mission carries on, and we do it with a newsletter, a podcast, just like you. We have a team writing editorial content, really focused on the bigger topics. And then we're doing some training and consulting as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. One of the things that caught my attention, in addition to your courses and some of the great guests you've had on your show, you cover a lot in terms of evaluating, reviewing different solutions. So I was curious what kind of goes into that. I did spend some time as a market research analyst evaluating certain solutions in the talent technology space. Certainly have spent time on, G2 and, some other sites that maybe take a more qualitative view as opposed to putting things into a grid or giving, solutions a numeric, score or things like that. So I'm just curious. It seems like you cover a tremendous amount of ground, and I was just curious how big your team is, or do you crowdsource, some of those reviews? I mean, how does that process work?
I would say all of the above. So we have a human team, we have freelancers, and then we have AI, obviously doing quite a bit of the work. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the G2 conundrum, which is that if I'm actually looking for something and I have to go through a list of 6,000 options with a lot of advertisements in between, it's kind of hard to find what I'm looking for. And, certain categories are complex. I mean, if you look at HR tech, there are a lot of categories where it's very hard to say, what is actually the best solution, because it depends on so many factors, right? And so that's where the quantitative approach obviously helps. But for certain other things, like just understanding what the AI in recruiting landscape look like, or what the most used AI tools for HR are, there's a much more like qualitative approach you can take. And so with all of those three teams, I would call them, we work together to try and just get sort of a truth out there in terms of what are the solutions people should look into. And I think, we do it in pretty traditional categories, I would say, like HRIS and HR software, employee management software. I think obviously it gets a lot more interesting when you get into the newer categories that maybe didn't even really exist 2 years ago, right, like AI recruiting software. And so I think that's where we really shine in really keeping a finger on the pulse in terms of like what kind of companies are out there, what is worth looking into for people who are looking for solutions, and also giving them an opportunity to be spotlighted towards that audience. And obviously we are both part of the People GPT community. So there's like often a lot of discussions around, hey, I'm looking for this, what would you recommend? And typically those recommendations from people you trust are a lot better than just some directory with like 6,000 listings.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be a little bit like the skilled version of that, where it's still publicly accessible, but it is definitely a curated look into, what is out there.
I think it was Glenn Cathay who put a poll out this morning on LinkedIn around why aren't companies investing, more in, generative AI tools. And my response was, well, I hope it's just because they haven't actually figured out what their strategy is and not because they don't think it's actually worth it.
It's probably both. Yeah.
If you think about historically where, people have been complaining forever that they haven't invested enough in L&D, or it's not personalized enough, or, things like that. And so you're right. That's definitely part of it. But it just seems like, let's say you're a Microsoft shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Copilot is on everyone's devices. Like maybe you haven't fully enabled all the Copilots, and I'm not even sure like how the architecture looks these days. But it just seems like, and now with Apple's recent announcements, that iOS 18 is going to have all these AI features, and they're going to have, onboard AI, custom AI chips and all this stuff. And it's like in people's personal and professional lives, they are now inundated with AI. So if you're going to now choose to not help guide them in any way, I mean, that is like one of the most short-sighted, shoot yourself in the foot kind of, situations I've ever heard of. I mean, you've got to figure it out, and you've got to do so, quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So like even take the example of Microsoft, right? So let's say you're a company, you're already on Microsoft, and I've been in these discussions, right? So you're already on Microsoft. So therefore, if everyone is already using their productivity software, when it comes to choosing your best option for AI, it's probably going to be Copilot, even though I don't think it compares to a lot of the tools out there. But just for the sake of adding it onto something you're already using and it being able to tap into all your documents and all your presentations, and again, dating years or decades back, that's a pretty powerful proposition, right? Then a company is still looking at it's $30 per employee per month on top of your normal Microsoft fees, right? That's a $360 per employee per year because you have to pay it on an annual basis. And so if you're a company of 1,000 people, you're looking at $400K out the door, and you're not investing that $400K with the idea of, oh, maybe a year later we'll pull the plug on it, right? Because it's $400K for software fees. Then all the onboarding cost and time, all the change management, right? Because again, we've seen now from the research, if you give people the tool, that's not enough. If you just give people Copilot, most people are probably going to be like, what is this nonsense? There's like a newer version of Clippy on my desktop. What do I do with it? That also goes into, your L&D team, and they have to really be in it. So they have to go into Microsoft training, and they have to understand it at that level. And then they have to develop training, and then you're working with Microsoft, and that's just on that side, right? You have to go through security audits. Like company I talked to had to go through a 2-week security audit to make sure that all those files on OneDrive are not just going to everyone, because suddenly this file that no one would have seen that had a certain security permission now is available to everyone. And that's very scary, right? In a big global company. So just looking at that practical case, it sounds easy of like, AI is everywhere and you should kind of embrace it, which I totally agree. But it's such a huge bet to take out. Let's say it's 400 plus 400, right? Like almost like $1 million bet for a 1,000-person company, and then you don't really know what's going to come out of that, right? And so I think you see really great case studies, right? So we've seen the Moderna case study. Yesterday, I interviewed Prop, the CTO at BCGX. They have a 3,000-person team building AI applications. They're working with a lot of these like really big companies and helping them make that transition. By the way, they're all on ChatGPT Enterprise. But it is a huge project with, getting it wrong is pretty bad too. And so I think the recent Asana AI State of Work report showed it very clearly that 90% of the companies are still at the very first stages of adopting AI. And if you kind of overlay that with the Microsoft data, which showed that 75% of people are doing the BYOAI, bringing your own AI to work, then you're getting a really bad situation where the company is not moving fast enough because there is so much to be decided. The employees are leapfrogging immediately and they're bringing all their own tools in. And that means use cases are fragmented. The data is going to all kinds of providers. Like, who knows what Otter is doing with all my meeting transcript data, or Read AI? Like, do I know a lot about that company? And so that's part of what we're trying to do now, is actually starting to sit down and look into what are the data privacy and issues, and where are they storing that data? What's the who is behind this company? Because there's just a lot of question marks out there in terms of the companies that are running the AI tools that we see right now.
We keep saying, HR leaders, here's your opportunity. Don't squander it, and don't, relinquish control to, IT or to your, chief data officer or somebody else. Like, you guys are in the driver's seat, your, proverbial seat at the table, whatever. But I just wonder, at large enterprises, I feel like the technology leadership would really love to just...
Visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shally's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best-kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
Have fewer throats to choke, as they say, when it comes to the vendor, landscape, right? So you're right. I mean, Copilot, the anecdotal, feedback I get is it's just like all their other
it's fine,
stuff.
yeah,
it's fine. They're not going to prioritize user experience or, some extra, bells and whistles at the risk of cyber privacy, audits that are going to keep coming, and a whole slew of risks.
That's the enterprise play, yeah.
Still have the shadow IT problem, probably worse than ever, when it comes to these tools, because if you don't like the answer you get from Copilot, what are you going to do? You're going to hop on your phone and you're going to ask Apple Intelligence, or you're going to ask Gemini or Fred, whoever. You're going to go to an alternative, because we already know that the same prompt in different generative AI tools is actually going to give you at least a slightly different answer by the way it's, trying to understand the question. Or
yeah, I would say vastly different, right? There's going to be huge differences in how something like Copilot would answer versus, using cloud. And again, that's just for asking questions. But when you go deeper into the flow of work and you're actually looking at what am I mostly doing at work, there are going to be tools that are going to outshine something like Copilot pretty quickly. So I don't think that you can really avoid people bringing in their own AI tools, but it does mean that there has to be some vetting. And like you said, who is then carrying that agenda? Because obviously IT has a big say in that. On the other side, 90% of this isn't really about technology. It's really about people, because I think Ethan Malik said it the best, that this is not software, right? This is not software in the sense that, software was always something that you could install or use in the cloud, and it had a button, and when you push a certain button and a certain action would take place. And software is very regular, it's very strict, it's very methodical. You can implement it, you can train people on it, and then they use the software. This is like a coworker. This is bringing new people into the workforce. They just happen to be AIs, right? And that's exactly how we use AI in our team. I've said many times, whether I go, if I remember something I have to do, whether I go on Slack and mention one of my colleagues, or I go into ChatGPT and I mention one of my GPTs, it's almost the same to me. Only difference is the GPTs work 24/7. They never ask for a raise. They never go to HR because I say something wrong, right? So I think this is really a human challenge. And if we really look at AI as another colleague and as part of our new workforce, it has to be first of all, it has to be a company issue, CEO issue, but then very, very quickly in line, it has to be an HR issue, because you're really talking about a new generation of employees coming in, and how do our current employees work well with them? And I would say that whenever I'm working very hands-on, in the Lead with AI course, when you're working one-on-one with people or with teams, there you really see people suddenly, it's just flipping a switch. They see it completely differently because they've been hearing about it as a piece of software, not as a new coworker. But the moment that they see it as a coworker, they also approach it completely differently. And one person who was in the course actually said, and pretty senior person, obviously, because it's for executives, She said, I didn't realize how bad I was at delegating until I started working really with AI. But that's it, right? It's another person that you delegate work to, and the better your instructions are, the better the outputs are. And so therefore, to me, it's totally an HR issue and not so much an IT issue. Maybe IT is involved in which platform to select. But again, for most companies, that is already pretty obvious, because if you're already on Microsoft, you're probably going to choose Copilot. Doesn't really make sense to separate all the data that AI needs to be really good and the AI, right? If you're already on Google, you're going to go on Gemini, right? When that rolls out fully in enterprise, right? So it doesn't really make sense for companies. So I would say IT definitely has to be involved in that. Otherwise, to me, it's purely an HR issue.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree on this is really about people and behavior change. And when I was at NBC Universal, there was a consultancy that laid out this automation strategy and an automation like maturity scale, right? You had RPA, robotic process automation, and then you had intelligent automation, where it was a little bit more than just, if then kinds of statements, and it had a little bit of smarts to it. And then there was cognitive automation, which really gets into where we are now with actual AI and having it as part of your decision support system, which is incredibly important in the talent and HR space, as you know well. And so you can't just look at historical, patterns of decisions and say, well, I know what you're going to do, so I'll just take care of it. Like, whoa. No, that's not exactly how it works. Not to mention the fact that most organizations don't have the data quality and data maturity, data and analytics maturity to even do that, even if you wanted to, which it's into a whole nother topic around. I talked to another guest about, like, just because you can automate something or use AI for something doesn't mean you necessarily should. And I think these are responsible and ethical kinds of questions.
Absolutely. But I also think that, like, the best case studies out there right now, right? If you look at the Moderna OpenAI case study, if you look at the Microsoft HR, VP of HR, like they wrote this really great case study. And in all of those examples, it's really not so much the company deciding what to do. I mean, the company may have chosen which platform, which in Microsoft case is pretty easy to choose. They may have chosen the platform, but in all of those instances, they're really leaving it to the employees to say, here's where I'm going to apply it. Because Josh Bersin said a few months ago, I think in a different context, but your frontline workers, they know what work they do much better than you. So it doesn't really make sense to try and solve this at a leadership level or at an organizational level. Again, as long as you introduce this as a new coworker that can alleviate a lot of the work that you probably don't really like, right? What BCG calls the toil part of your job, and it can free you up to do the more joyful part of your job. As long as it's introduced in that way, it makes much more sense to leave it to employees and say, where's the use case going to be for you? And in both those case studies, it was very much, that use cases came up that they would never have thought about, because again, like at a central level, you don't really know the work as deeply as the people on the ground. And so I think then you do need training. I think I totally agree with that part, Bob, you do need training on the, how do you use it ethically? And how do we, what data do you input and what data do you not input? Because look, OpenAI may say that if you switch this toggle, the model isn't trained on it, but the data flows somewhere, and you never know what's going to happen, right? So there still needs to be some training. And I think Jared Spatero, the AI chief at Microsoft, said in a webinar a while ago that, one of the key things you need to teach people is better judgment, right? What outputs of AI do you accept, and what do you edit, and what do you throw away? Right, that kind of judging, but again, in very much the same fashion as we were talking about how you work with it in terms of instructing, receiving the output back. It's just like working with a colleague. If you brief a junior colleague to do a project for you, you're not going to be hands off and just forward it to your boss, right? You're probably going to check that work, and you're going to spot the things that are not good about it, and you're going to rebrief that part until you have the right work. So that training on judgment and the training on instruction and training on what is ethical and training what falls within the guidelines of the company is all going to be a huge part of how companies work with AI and letting the employees work with AI.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I never like hearing stories about like employee monitoring.
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, That's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find him anywhere.
Hey, this is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Practitioner Corner podcast. It's a wonderful podcast about the journey, the paths of how practitioners, both HR and TA, kind of go from high school, college, all the way to where they are right now. Some of the things that they've learned, how they've been successful, people that thrive around them, etc. It's a fun podcast. You'll love it. You'll learn from it. Subscribe to it. Thanks.
Because I think it just shows a complete lack of trust, and you're treating your employees like students or children.
Yes. and they are adults. Let's not forget.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this when social media, the advent of social media. I was at IBM, and they were quick to develop some what they called the social computing guidelines. Like, we expect you to behave like an adult, and that means not spending all day on Facebook and Twitter and whatever.
And by the way, if you have work to do, because I think this also goes into a lot of the debate around like remote work and hybrid work, if you have work to do and you're clear on your objectives and you actually like what you're working towards, like your goals and the company's goals are aligned, you're happy to do that work. Therefore, you cannot be on Facebook. And I think in a similar way, if again, there is a bit of education required maybe, but the moment that you understand broadly how these models work and what happens with the data and what are good use cases and bad use cases, your interest and the company's interests are very aligned. I think there's somehow this perception, and I spend a lot of time on the anti-work Reddit because you get the real sentiment of people, and on certain TikTokers comments, and you really see like when employees see, some video about some situation in the workplace and they all go on, it's like, that's exactly like with me. There's such a distrust between employees and companies that really doesn't need to be there, because the incentives should be pretty aligned. The company wants to achieve something. If the company achieves that, it makes money and therefore it can pay its employees. And if it's also something that you like working on and therefore doing good is doing well, etc., the incentives should be pretty aligned, and therefore these things should fall pretty naturally. But I also see, obviously, and that's where our whole mission comes from, I also see plenty of examples where that's not the case. And again, in the case of remote work, where companies are so distrusting of people and telling them to come into the office for quote unquote camaraderie and community, where people just travel for an hour, sit behind their laptop and do the same Zoom calls they would have done at home, and actually are handing in a lot of the productive time that they now spend commuting to the office. So I recently interviewed Amy Lashkakal from ADP, and she said, time to grown-upify work. Like, we cannot treat work as something that we have all the smarts, and like you said, Bob, we deal with a bunch of kindergartners and we need to control them, and we know what's better for them. We know when they should show up for work, and we know what tools to use, and da-da-da. I just don't think that works in this day and age. Like, maybe even 5 years ago that still would have worked. I just think like the genie is out of the bottle. We're working in very different ways. And again, that's what you see in AI, where the employees are leapfrogging their companies because they're getting smarter about these tools than most of the companies. Again, I train executives, and nothing against the people who are taking the course, but I just see it all the time that they are now, and at least they're awake to it, at least the people that I'm coaching, they're awake to it, that their employees are running faster than they are. They're walking across the floor, or they're seeing things on Slack where they're like, I don't even know how that works. Like, I don't know how you got that. I don't know how you did that, right? So they're doing this sort of like, we do a 2-week almost like boot camp where it's really, a bit of hard work, but you get to the point where you at least you understand AI and you're using a couple of tools and you're starting to develop your use cases. But, the people are working, like they're going faster. So I think if there was ever an age for, autonomy and agency with employees, it's now, and yeah, let them make wise decisions. But again, why would they not? Like, what are you doing in your company that people are against you?
Well, I think it's a bit ironic that we are still like laser focused on productivity, where generative AI use, that's actually that's like the new vanity metric, in my opinion. And yet we still have the return to office mandates.
Sanity.
You're literally hindering my ability to produce a metric that you like from a productivity standpoint. And oh, by the way, you're still measuring productivity largely at an individual level, and we don't work in isolation. We work as part of teams. Isn't that why you claim you want us back in the office in the first place? Because you want, to your point, the camaraderie and and all of that. So I just feel like a lot of organizations, like there's a lot of lip service. There's a lot of like, we don't know, so we're just gonna batten down the hatches, and I just think that's a huge mistake. I think shadow IT is worse than ever. I think that, to your point, the consumerization of IT, right, where what's happening in the consumer space is happening at a faster clip than what's happening inside organizations. That disparity is pretty bad, I think, to your point.
And I get it. It's terrifying. I mean, I get it. Like, I'm not running a big company. I'm not in an IT function in a big company. I would be terrified too. If you're seeing people, from whatever monitoring you're doing, or just anecdotally, you're seeing people bring in tools like Fireflies, Otter, giving them access to every meeting that you attend, and you're using 3-4 models, and you just heard that Gemini is really good for this, and now you're going to go on your logged ins. I would be terrified too, but hey, that's the reality. And again, like, the company is not going to go fast enough to deliver a credible alternative. And like the same, I totally get why companies would choose for a Gemini install or a Copilot install, because it links so well with the current infrastructure, and it does. Again, AI needs data, so that the best source of data is all your messaging and all your meetings and all your files. So I totally get it. But I think it's hard to avoid that someone brings in their own AI tool and says, look, this is what I need for X, right? And how agile you are and how responsive you are to people making those requests and bringing those things in, I think that's going to determine in a big part how competitive you're going to be in the marketplace, right? Because a company where, like, that's why I thought that Moderna case study, even though, of course, it's marketing, but why I thought it was so impressive, that if one of the most highly regulated industries, one of the most highly regulated companies in the world, like Moderna, can give people kind of like carte blanche and just develop whatever you want, create your own GPT, share them within the company, of course, with some training and with some guidance. And again, they had Slack channels where OpenAI people were in that channel. You could ask questions. They had office hours. They celebrated best practices. The CEO would tell everyone what GPT he developed and what worked, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if they can do it, it's clearly possible. But I know, again, like, the reality is different. I get it.
People are going to be building custom things and then pushing them to like an internal, library, like an internal repo or something like that. Then, yeah, you got to have some standards around that. And then you've got to have guardrails. I mean, just circling back to what we were talking about before about like this continuous monitoring. I mean, could just be around, usage and making sure that people aren't uploading, certain things. I mean, just like you would have, hopefully you've got good, cyber, policies and monitoring that make sure people aren't uploading, proprietary, data where it shouldn't go. So even just extending some of the things that we've done already in the data privacy and cybersecurity space, it seems like anybody could be the weak link, right? That's why I always say, when it comes to responsible AI, we're all responsible on some level. And so, without putting too much, constraints on it, it just seems like you should at least standardize on where there's a use case. Like you mentioned, Otter and Read.ai, which the latter, which I use, it is significantly better than Google's transcription when I've recorded Google Meets. Like, I don't know what happened because Google has been like the, poster child for, language and translation and whatever.
They invented Transformer, so yes.
Yeah, and yet they can't do a transcript.
But like that's the, again, like, the incentives are completely different, right? Like, someone, a founder somewhere, because I mostly work with startups, like a founder somewhere can say, yeah, that's the status quo. I mean, I saw an interview with the guy from Intercom yesterday, and he said, I saw Zendesk declining, and I saw that was my opportunity, right? It's like someone just can see something happening in the space, put one and one together, and then suddenly, you have a new idea, and you can probably execute it much better and much more targeted than the big platforms can. So the big platforms will still offer some of those solutions, just like, we work a lot in like the hybrid workplace booking software, right? Microsoft now is also integrating that, and Google is integrating that. And if you put a calendar invite, you can already select like where that meeting will take place, and there will be some stuff around desk booking, but it will never go as deep, and the UI will never be as targeted and polished as a singular provider focusing on that issue. And if you just look at like all the options out there right now, those guys can run so much faster. They can develop so much faster. And I think that's always been the case, obviously, in software. But I think the model is going to be very different now where, you could build platforms where, again, even the UI could be changed. You saw a little bit of that in the Gemini demo. By the way, Gemini excels in demos that never seem to come true. But you saw a little bit of that in the Gemini demo where UI was being produced in front of your eyes to display certain content in a certain way, right? So, you could see that you build platforms that could tailor UI even more specifically than what that startup can do. But I think there's no two ways about it, that there will always be the bigger platforms and then there will be startups who develop something. It's just that now everyone can be their own CTO. Like everyone can create their own AI startup because you now have, a Devin, you now have these Copilot coding agents. So the accessibility of creating something better will obviously be much higher. And therefore you probably see a lot more competition, which should only be really interesting for us, not CIOs. It should only be good for us to see what's out there.
Exactly. What are your thoughts on like the interoperability of some of these, agents, co-pilots or whatever? I mean, let's say you've got an AI powered talent solution and that needs to talk back to the HRIS or performance management systems or whatever that's, in a whole nother, AI, solar system. Are these all going to be sort of interoperable so that they speak to each other so that you don't have to rely less on like the big LLM, vendors? I mean, what's the evolution of all these agents, running around? I've heard terms like agentic.
Yeah, agentic computing. Yeah.
Libraries of agents and interoperable. Because I think it's one thing to just create something that can do a particular task, almost like an appliance. And it's another to interconnect, in a sort of IoT kind of context. Do you actually have a smart home or do you just have a smart fridge that doesn't talk to any other person or machine?
Yeah. And maybe we're fine with our fridges not talking behind our back to other appliances. It's like, well, he ate that this morning. Like, come on. But no, but I think, Bob, I think that's where you see Apple Intelligence kind of getting into, right? Where it's just to say, look, we know certain intents within applications. We're going to unlock that for developers so you can sort of name certain intents within your application. Now that becomes something that you can instruct Siri to do. So you're getting a lot deeper into one kind of central point and then access into everything, right? And again, like I just moved back from over 10 years in Asia, and you look at the super apps there, like a WeChat, right? Everyone wants to be the homepage. Everyone wants to be the starting point, right? So obviously Apple is making a really strong play for it right now. But it's the same thing with ChatGPT. They would like to be the starting point for everything, right? That's why you can control Perplexity and Consensus and all trails all from your ChatGPT main interface. That's only going to be more so when it's all done through voice, right? And then obviously Copilot wants to be your main interface to the world. And then Gemini, of course, wants to do that too. So everyone wants to be that central point. And I think we even see this in something like an Eightfold saying, we're not going to wait for ServiceNow or someone else to build an all-encompassing AI. I think Sana AI did it too. We're going to give you the universal assistant that, yeah, it works with us, but it also works with a bunch of other applications. Because again, we don't want you to have to wait for another company to do that. And obviously, they also have some benefit from that. I think everyone wants to be that first point because, if you're Google, you control all of search. That's pretty lucrative, right? Like if you're the main interface, the main choke points through which all of the demands go, you can decide which application to send that to. So I think that's going to be something that has to be solved. And then everything on the back end, right? Like who is going to unlock what for whom? That's probably going to be a big puzzle. And, that's why I love following Josh Bersin because he talks to a lot of people at, ServiceNow and Workday and all of these other big platforms. And it seems like everyone at the same time is working on something very similar, which is the universal assistant. Who are you going to end up using? I mean, that's a good question, right? Are we all going to spend all of our time in Workday AI and just do everything from there? I don't know, maybe. What do you think?
The average person might just be like, wait, which one where's my starting point to do this? And can I just have on my homepage, to your point, one interface, call it whatever you want, call it, Jarvis, whatever. And then it just knows what other agents.
Right. I need time off. Oh, I need to handle that with that software. I need to put an expense claim in. I do it with that software. Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds good. Let's do that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, even in the consumer space, it was like it became an unsolved, dilemma because we weren't sure, and there was no one at the time that was building something that was, to your point, like this sort of universal, translator or universal, virtual assistant or whatever. But I mean, even in the consumer space, that hasn't been solved, right? I mean, Apple's trying to wedge themselves in and progress along the walled garden kind of mentality, which is totally understandable. But if I just have a general question, I have an Alexa Echo Dot right there. I've got my iPhone and my Apple Watch. I've got Google Home. I've got.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Rudiman. What are you doing? Working? Nah, you're listening to a podcast about work, and that barely counts. So while you're at it, check out my show, Punk Rock HR, now on the Work Defined Network. We chat with smart people about work, power, politics, and money. Are we succeeding? Are we fixing work? Probably not. Work still sucks, but tune in for some fun, a little nonsense, and a fresh take on how to fix work once and for all.
And then I have whatever's on my Lenovo laptop, right? So I have 5, right? And I don't know who's going to give me the best answer or the answer that I like or need or whatever. So if you think forward to true adoption, right, not just implementation, but actual user adoption, going back to the people-centric nature of all of this, that's a huge friction point. People are like, I'm not sure which direction to go.
And for some companies that may mean, right, Bob, that, and this is a discussion I had with Matt from BCG yesterday, or BCGX, right? They have 3,000 AI engineers, right? BCG is 30,000 people. They have 3,000 people purely doing AI, like building, engineering, right? Because for a lot of companies, the answer may be build your own. So almost like doesn't matter what model is behind that. Again, there may be some implications in terms of if you're already doing most of your computing on Azure cloud, maybe you're going to tap into Cloud or like whatever, if you're on AWS, you may use, Model X. So that may have some linkage there. But for a lot of companies, there may be, and I've spoken to people in the last cohort of the course whose companies have developed their own. And there you can be a little bit more directive because that's basically you can say, well, at least we all know, to your point, out of the 5-6 touch point, this is the only sanctioned channel to go through when it comes to work related, using an AI for meeting transcription, using an AI for answering questions, using an AI for analyzing data. It's very simple. We have our own. Here's how you use it, right? I know McKinsey had developed something already last year. This company that I spoke to as part of the cohort, they have done it. And then at least that first point is very clear. I think then the problem that you still may face is that people, again, they use that and they can just feel that it's not on par with what they're using in their private life. And it's like, wait, yesterday I generated with a little bit of back and forth, like the perfect recipe for something I wanted to cook based on a photo that I took of my fridge and what I had there, which is now it sounds futuristic, is now a normal use case. And now I'm coming to work and the thing doesn't even do X, Y, Z, right? So you may still run into that issue, but that's like a whole other layer that I think all these kind of integrators and companies are jumping on, which is letting companies develop their own first point, which then corresponds with both the proprietary company data, like I think it's called Lily, right, at McKinsey, where it's digging from 60 years of McKinsey data. That is your unique advantage, right? That's your differentiator. And then on top of that, it can tap into one of the other models, right? And then the company can make it cost effective by saying, for certain things, we don't need, like GPT-4o. We can just use like a really cheap model that does, really, it takes a bit longer, but, like it can do this and that. So that's like a whole other layer where bigger companies have to think about. It's not even a choice of which tool do I buy or which tool do I sanction. We're actually going to have to build our own because, again, that's going to be our differentiator. And you saw this at JP Morgan, right? JP Morgan has like 2,000 people now dedicated on AI. And they're building their own AI interface, again, their own AI model, because, again, they have such unique data sources and they're seeing that as their competitive advantage. So they were really early in the AI news because they were forbidding people to use ChatGPT. But then they got up pretty nicely by building their own model and now giving people like a totally unique and competitive advantage in being able to dig into, again, decades of data that only they have access to, and then linking that to other AI tools. So, I mean, the complexity is high, just to summarize that.
Yeah. What you're highlighting is that once you can build your own stuff, then everyone is both a builder and consumer of this technology, which just, sort of reemphasizes the need for responsible AI by design through, usage and all your decision-making processes. So the talent space, that is full talent lifecycle kind of awareness and responsibility. And then to your point earlier, you've got to think about this when you do, upskill people around AI. It's not just, here's the output of the tool. Let's think critically about where it may have gone, awry, or, just don't take it blindly like a calculator's, output, right? But now people are going to take this initiative and go and start tinkering themselves, as I know, through the community, we've seen a lot of people, do that already. And I know you've got a course coming up to teach people how to, build their first AI employee, right? So everyone is going to be getting into this game, and anyone with $20 can go and build a custom GPT in ChatGPT Plus. So this is something we all have to, really think, deeply about. And going back to the productivity thing, it's like, if you're incentivizing people based on metrics that are purely on, throughput and efficiency and productivity, you've got to really rethink that. Like, at what cost?
Yeah, I mean, that's not treating people as people, right? Which is ironic in the age of AI. And so that's why I totally agree with like Debbie Lovick and the BCG team's kind of perspective on, AI is a way to reduce people's toil at work. It's a way to increase people's joy at work. That drives more engaged employees, and more engaged employees, as we all know from the Gallup data, they take less sick days, they stay with the company longer, they're better colleagues, they're better leaders, So from every perspective, like, again, use AI, look at how people are doing the work today, and then let them use AI to take out that part of the job that they don't find any joy in anyway, right? And I think you look at that, and to do that from like with the ethics in mind. Again, you look at that Microsoft HR case study, they said we did very light education upfront. We gave people the tools and we said, go and code away, go and create, little programs. And by the way, what is the first thing that the HR team built? An FAQ bot, of course. But they said, look, here are 5 core values, 5 core principles for how we build AI at Microsoft. And everyone who builds, because you're now a builder to your point, everyone who builds has to adhere to those policies or to those core values. And so again, you're making it a very shared discussion. You're making it very much like a co-creation. And you're telling people, look, we uphold these rules. And now that you're going to build, you're going to uphold these rules as well. And those principles are very straightforward, and you're using it for good, and the data, right? So I think that's all very possible. And in that case study, Chris Fernandez mentioned, you don't have to be a technologist to roll out ChatGPT or Copilot. You don't have to be a technologist to roll out AI. You just need an adoption plan. You just need some kind of idea of how it's going to play a role in your company. And as I'm now working not only with individual executives, but also with entire like leadership teams, sometimes that's the hardest part, is to kind of, they all have employees using AI. They feel a little bit left behind. Sometimes the older people are, the more that's the case. And then they need to be aligned on, okay, now I kind of get what AI does. And again, like mentioning things like AI is not software, it's your new colleague, and letting them build their first AI employee, and understanding that, and again, this is like bursting bubbles a lot of the time, understanding that a lot of things that we think is uniquely human work is extremely easy to automate with AI, because a lot of what we do is an if this, then that. And if AI cannot do it outright, it can at least give you the first draft. And so an example is something very simple like answering emails, right? We think that that's like, no one could ever take that over. And everyone has these like nightmares of AI sending all kinds of rubbish as reply to emails. And then I let people break down, how do you answer emails, right? It's like, well, I open my inbox, I click on the title, I read the email, I understand what that person is saying based on everything I know. I think, what could I reply? I choose an option, I reply. It's like, oh, interesting. That's exactly how Grammarly AI works. And that's exactly how now Apple Intelligence will work, because I saw that they copied it from Grammarly. And Copilot will work in the same way. I mean, there's so much work that we do as humans that is so easy to automate. And so just doing that and just allowing people to do that and getting people to take those like 20, 30% productivity gains, and then not applying that to just doing more work, right? My first lesson is you got to meditate on Parkinson's law. The amount of work will always expand to the amount of time that you allow for it, right? If we're going to have a 30% productivity gain, but then we're going to fill it up with other nonsense work that we don't really like doing, then what's the point, right? So that's like really my call to action is you got to use this for something that makes people feel better about the way that they work and the work that they do. And so use that extra time. Maybe we split the difference, right? Like maybe you can work a little bit less time. I put everyone on a 4-day work week schedule because I don't need them for 5 days anymore. And the other part, use that for more strategic work, use it for more collaboration, use it for spearheading new initiatives, thinking about the millions of things you could do and that weren't possible maybe 2 years ago because we didn't have AI, right? So there's so much possible there. And I don't think it takes a technologist. I think it just takes someone, Amy Leske-Kyle calls that like a courageous leader who steps up and says, the reality is here. Here's the opportunity. Here are the guidelines. Here are maybe those core values or those core ethical values. And now go and experiment. And let's all share in real time, because we've never had something in a company where from the CEO to the front desk worker, everyone was learning at the same time. It's never happened, right? There is no time for the L&D team to learn something to then go and teach it, because we're all hearing the press release yesterday, right? And let's all learn at the same time. Let's all share what knowledge we gain and what are the best use cases, and then collectively, use this tool to our advantage. I think that's the only way to do it.
If you can establish, a sort of let's learn from our failures. Let's do this together. Let's experiment in a safe environment. You put up a sandbox or whatever. I mean, IBM was great at that.
Very different.
They had a program called Technology Adoption Program. Unfortunately, there were no low code, no code tools back then, so only developers were actually builders. There's definitely going to be some potentially cultural sort of changes in the way that they think about allowing people the time to do that. But you're right. I mean, you've got to show them that you're going to be okay with this kind of experimentation, and that the time that you do save, some of that is going to be, reinvested in the workforce in some capacity. It's either, like you said, give them a little bit more, flex time, or give them the means to actually take on some of those higher value. Everyone's talking about, oh, look, think of all the things you could do.
Well, let's do that. Yeah.
Or we saved 20%, so we're going to cut 20% of the people, and now you're right back where you started, because now you got to pick up the slack with their nonsense or whatever.
And by the way, and good luck, because again, like the competitor that doesn't do that and that basically supercharges that 20% of people is going to be way better off than a company that cuts 20% of their workforce. And so I think that's, because I know we're at time, I think that's like the one thing that companies need to understand is that it's still so early days for AI. So I know everyone is stressed about it, and the whole BYO AI thing is a little bit intimidating, and there are a lot of things that are very stressful. But if you pick it up today, you can still be ahead of 80% of companies. You can still be ahead of basically everyone in your industry, most likely, unless I think you work in insurance where they cut on a bit earlier. Like if you pick it up today and you sit with your leadership team for 2-3 weeks, and you get everyone to understand it and use it, and then you roll it out into your company and you allocate time for experimentation, and you do town halls where you share use cases and you celebrate openly that people use AI, so that we don't become these like hidden cyborgs where we're secretly using AI, which is happening a lot, which doesn't contribute to anything positive at all. This is still a huge opportunity. But I do think the longer you wait, the harder it's going to get, because if you then step in 6 months from now and everyone has already a year head start on you, it's not that you're starting on that day, you're really starting behind, because then you have to contextualize and grasp the overall idea of what is AI and how does it work in an organization, all that. Then it may become too late. But right now is still a great time to start.
I do have one final question for you before I let you go. When you hear the title of this podcast, Elevate Your AIQ, what do you think of when you hear AIQ?
There's a big misunderstanding about AI. And that is that AI is technology, which technically it is, but it's the most human technology that's ever been invented. And so elevating the AIQ in a way has to be about seeing this as a new coworker, seeing this as a collaborator. I think as Ethan Mollick calls it, a co-intelligence, seeing it as that co. And the other part of that is that it doesn't mean that we only have to learn about, or we only have to, let AI do what AI does best, right? I interviewed Dr. Alexandra Samuel, Wall Street Journal technologist who has been, doing technology for a lot longer than I have. And she said it, I think, really well, which is that, yes, AI is evolving really quickly, but we have to evolve too. And sort of the people that, you're seeing this very clearly, again, in the Asana data, you saw it in the Microsoft data. In both those cases, you're seeing that the power users report much more that AI is making them more productive, that AI is making their work more joyful, that they get a lot of benefit out of AI. The people who use it like once a month or once a week and do something random with it and give a really bad prompt and then get a really bad output and then toss it aside again and say, you see, it doesn't work. I think leveling up the AI IQ is really about understanding like what this is and really starting to build that relationship and having to evolve on both sides. And also evolving yourself to say, how do I work? Like that person in my class who said, I realized how bad I am at delegating now that I'm working with AI. I think that's a really big part of it, is that you got to evolve yourself. You got to work very differently with AI than you worked with people before, than you work with technology before. But you got to learn this dynamic. You got to learn what you're uniquely good at and what you bring to the table and what AI can take over and what that relationship is between you two. I think that's a really big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Daan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. This was a fantastic conversation as usual. Thank you.
My pleasure.